Welcome to the Backstage Creative. My name is Krista Copper. On this podcast, I interview people who work behind the scenes of theater. So people who design the sets, costume, lights, and sounds, the people who run the mixing board in the back, people who play instruments in the pit or music direct, people who stage manage or technical direct. All of the people who work behind the scenes and put so much passion and love and creativity into live theater. Today's my conversation with Jhanae Bonnick. I heard about Jhanae from the Broadway Women's Fund. They released a list right before the pandemic hit. So it was like early March. They released a 50 women to watch list. And it was 50 women, everyone from designers to stage managers, playwrights, producers, directors. And I've had several people on the podcast from this list, and they've all been incredible. So yeah, I'm very grateful for the Broadway Women's Fund for creating that list, because it's been very helpful for me. This interview was awesome. So there were so many nuggets of wisdom scattered throughout this conversation that I'm just so glad that I get to share it. So here's my conversation with Jhanae Bonnick. Cool. Well, thanks for taking the time to do this. I really appreciate it.
My pleasure.
So have you been able to be a part of any online virtual streaming performances?
I have. I've done a few things, and they've ranged from what felt like a very traditional lab of a musical. It was 29 hours. We tracked hours. It was like felt kind of very normal, except we were all in our separate locations. To what felt like a full-on production of recording scenes and those being sent to a video editor to create a viewing experience, to things that were just digital writers' rooms, that felt they just were like rehearsal rooms, as though we were sitting around a table working, to a reading that was pre-recorded and presented as a recorded artifact but treated like everybody was reading, no one was memorized, and we kind of knew that was going to be the deal. I've touched a few things, and then I've done one or two things in person as well that are socially distanced, and one was a music video, another was a live event. So I've kind of gotten to touch one or two things that have been happening in the quarantine.
Yeah, that's good that you've been able to do work. Do you feel like it's been like those performances have been effective or well received?
Yeah, I think it depends on the thing. I think I've been lucky enough to work on things that people are really interested in, slash that have traction, and lucky enough also to be working with people who are really thinking about the medium of online theater, whatever that means to you. And so working really hard to make sure that the experience of the audience and the experience of those people viewing it is very clear in the understanding that we get that you're not seeing what you're used to seeing. And so we're going to tailor this to make sense for what we are currently able to do, and give you something that makes sense and is enjoyable as it can currently stand. Versus, I think when people feel like something is less successful, it's because it's not adjusting right to the medium and to the differences. And so I think I've been lucky enough to work on things that are just being very open about the fact that we get it. It's 2020, and we're doing what we can.
Yeah, for sure. As a stage manager, like what do you do for virtual stuff?
It's interesting. It's very similar. There are some
Okay.
things that are different or new, but for the most part, it's the same. It's getting everybody's contact information and scheduling and figuring out a way to make rehearsals work in the land of the digital world. I think it's much more. I've sent so many doodles and lettuce meets and when to meets in the last 5 months, and I'd never heard of any of them except Doodle before lockdown, so that we can try to coordinate and find times. I think especially because now, the whole world is open to you. And so while I have stayed in Eastern time, not everyone has. So scheduling has become slightly more complicated in terms of having to make it very clear what time zone you're in. But other than that, at its core, it's the same. It's making sure that everyone is available for rehearsals, that they know the material that they're going to be working on, that they have that material available to them, that as it gets updated, they get it. It's all the same principally. It just changes in terms of not being able to look someone in their face and make sure they understand. That deeper intentional one-on-one connection is a little bit harder in these times. But in terms of like actual step-by-step job items, for the most part, it's the same. We still send reports. We still take notes at rehearsal. We're still, working with the director to make sure that everything that needs to get done gets done. And then I think depending on scale, some things have been different in terms of when I've worked on some pieces that were pre-recorded, for example, I am sometimes one of the Zoom accounts that hits record and then is, responsible for, say, transferring that recorded material to the person who is arranging it, right? Which is not normally something that maybe stage management would be involved in, but then again, normally we're not recording them. So, but I think for the most part, in terms of the things you understand as stage management's job, it's overall the same.
Well, good. That's good to hear. Was there any like mistake or any pitfall that you fell into that you could like warn other stage managers who are doing virtual things like, hey, don't do this. This doesn't work.
I think it's hard to know that because one, we're all, so many of us are working at the same time and we're just keeping each other constantly up to date in terms of, oh, I found this very weird thing about Zoom today. Did you know about that? So there's kind of this constant stream of information passing amongst the stage management community as we all figure this out. And also the technology is changing so quickly that a thing that I might say right now might not necessarily be true by the time you listen to this. For example, there was one week we really wished we could pin people on Zoom so that they were in the orientation in their little boxes that we wanted them to be in for the recording. And the week that we recorded that project, it was impossible. And the next week, Zoom made an update, and it was possible.
Oh, cool.
And so, yeah, I think anything I can think of to say, I'm like, I bet the solution is on the way, and by the time someone listens to this, that will no longer be true.
That's fair. Cool. So I would love to hear your background, where you're from, where you went to school, if you went to school, how you got to where you are, and kind of like milestones in your career.
Sure, sure. So I'm a born and raised New Yorker. I'm first generation American, and my parents came here from Jamaica in the 80s with my two older siblings. And so I've spent my whole life in New York State in some way, shape, or form, which will come into play later in terms of how I made it to where I made it pre-quarantine. I was a theater kid in high school. I really enjoyed, hanging out with the kids who were in the musicals and the plays. But as I like to say, while I can carry a tune in a bucket if it's reinforced, it's not like pleasant. I don't know that anybody wants me to be doing that. And so I had to figure out a way, to stay involved and hang out with all my friends and do this thing that I enjoyed without going on stage, which I did not necessarily enjoy. At my high school, there wasn't really a super opportunity to stage manage. I don't know that at the time we really knew what that was per se. A lot of the technical jobs were done by adults for obvious reasons. It wasn't really a thing that I could do in high school, but when I was in high school, I went to see, with my classmates, we took a school trip to see a Broadway show every year. And one year we saw In the Heights. And I tell this story a lot actually because it really is kind of the origin of how I found out about stage management and decided it's what I wanted to do, because we saw In the Heights, and if you know that show, there's a song called Blackout where that is indeed what happens. There's a blackout in the theater. There's a huge light cue where everything shutters and goes out, and a sound cue that sounds like the power going out. And in my memory of this moment, even the exit lights went out. I don't now, working in the theater, I know that's not true. That's not legal. But in my memory of this moment, like even the exit lights went out. And it was executed so perfectly on so many levels that the lights went out. This huge sound moment happened, and our teacher was like, "It's okay. They'll tell us what to do." Like there was a moment when we really thought that there was a blackout on Broadway. And the teachers were calming students and being like, "It's gonna be okay." And then the next song started. And on the bus ride home, my chorus teacher, I sat with her and I was like, "So like who did that? Like whose job is it to make a moment like that happen?" And she kind of explained to me some of what all of these jobs that are in the theater that are possible are, right? In terms of like, okay, well, there was a lighting designer who designed this moment, and a programmer who programmed the lights to do that thing. And there was a sound designer who made this sound cue. But here at the show, there was a human who pressed a button. And then there was a stage manager who was responsible for telling all of those people to do those things at the same time to execute this moment. And so that was kind of my introduction to what stage management could do. And obviously, from my retelling of this, that's something that has really stuck with me. That, you know, executed correctly, stage management can truly change a room, right? So from there, you know, I went on to do some community theater in high school, and I kind of focused in on stage management as like, this is something I enjoy and think is great. And then I went to college, and stage management was not the plan. I as a freshman, I was an international relations major, and my plan, I think, was to be a lawyer. But to be honest, like who knows what 18-year-old Jhanae was thinking? And but by throughout my 4 years, and I transferred schools a few times. I, over the course of time, it became clear to me that theater was not a fun thing that I was doing on the side. It was the thing I was actually dedicating my brain space to. And so I switched majors, and by the time I graduated from SUNY New Paltz in upstate New York, and by the time I graduated, I graduated 2 bachelor's degrees, one in English and one in theater. Then I was done, and I said to myself, I'm going to give myself a year in New York City to try to figure it out. And if in that year I quote make it, I will stick it out. I am meant to do this. And if I don't quote make it in that year, I will, go to grad school or change jobs, or I don't really know what I thought my plan was. But the thing I told myself was that I had a year. And I came to New York, and for a year, I told myself that I was making it. Looking back on that, I don't know how true that was. Um, but at the time, every internship and backstage crew position and, stage managing for a small college downtown that made it so that I was able to pay my train ticket from the Hudson Valley to here, and that's it, was making it. I like made that making it so that I could stick it out and keep working. And that's how I subsisted for about a year. I lived at home with my parents and took the Metro North train in from the Hudson Valley and the subway from there. And I worked for just enough money to be able to afford those things. And I packed my food, and, I was exhausted, but that's what I did. Probably beginning of year two, near the end of year one, maybe, I got an internship at the public theater, which at the time did not pay a lot of money. And so I negotiated with my parents to say it will pay me enough that I can pay, if I don't use the money for anything else, I can pay, rent on this very tiny room in Bay Ridge, Brooklyn, which, if you know, New York is like literally as far away from Manhattan as you can get. So I negotiated with my parents that they were like, okay, we can help you a little bit. And they could help me just enough to keep me in ramen noodles so that I could use the money I was getting from the public to pay this, whatever it was, $500 of rent a month for this little room that I had. And I did that. And then I lucked out that led directly into the show and the project that when people ask me what is the thing that launched your career, is the show I tell them about, which is Hadestown at New York Theater Workshop in 2016. So during that first year of telling myself I was making it. I put my name on this list that existed online that I'm sure if I searched for it, I could still find. I think it was called something like Diverse Theater Artists or something like that. It had everything from directors to actors to, I'm so sorry, I misspoke. There were no actors. It was basically every job but actors could put themselves on this list because actors have other ways to get seen and noticed. But this list was for basically everybody else and leaning heavily on designers and technicians. And so I threw my name on this list and figured if something comes of it, great, and if not, what's the worst that'll happen? I actually don't know how much longer after, but I assume a while. The stage management team for Hadestown at New York Theater Workshop, Lindsay Turtle Talbot, Shelley Miles, interviewed everybody on that list who was in New York, who identified as a stage manager, and who accepted an interview to be a PA for Hadestown at the workshop. And if I'm remembering correctly, they interviewed somewhere between like 50 and 70 people. They just were really committed to like bringing in someone who could learn and who could use this job and who could be a really good asset to the team. And so they got my name off of that list, and that's how I got my interview for Hadestown. That's definitely the show that when people ask, that's the one that I'm like, that's how I got where I got, in three ways. Because I just literally learned so much about stage management working on that show, and so much about what my job is supposed to look like. The things that are really hard to teach in college were things that I was taught there. It's where I learned to do script changes. It's where I learned about how to do understudy rehearsals, how to put replacements in, how to do a call script for a musical with counts, how to do, a blocking book and also blocking tracks for specific characters. I just learned so much on that show. I was just a sponge in my time on that show, learning so much. And then also because of the people that I met there and the institution have carried me through in my career, I can trace almost all of my work back to that show in some way, shape, or form. Because the actors, the designers, the stage management team, the director are all people that I have worked with and continue to work with. And the same can be said for the institution. I've gone on to production stage management for New York Theater Workshop twice. And one of those times was Slave Play, which led to my Broadway debut. So Hadestown and the workshop are definitely the ways that I see my career as having, that's that's when I really quote made it to a place that I told myself I was for about a year and a half before I got that job. And so that's kind of how I got to where I was. I PA'd that show, and it ran for long enough and extended long enough that I got my equity card. That show led to me PAing my first Broadway show, and a few years later, I have since been kind of bouncing back and forth between PSMing off Broadway and PAing on Broadway until this past year, where Slave Play went to Broadway, and I transferred with it and served as the stage manager.
Awesome. That's a cool trajectory. What are maybe are there any differences between working off Broadway and working on Broadway?
I think the biggest difference is scale, which seems obvious, but is not a cop out, I promise. It is in so many ways about scale, and not just in terms of like the shows are literally bigger because the spaces are literally bigger. I think it's also kind of at every point, right? The budgets are bigger. 9 times out of 10, the casts are bigger, the teams are bigger. I could almost say the word always here. The difference is not qualitative but quantitative. It's truly just that things are so much bigger on Broadway because of the space and the funds. And in terms of stage management as a job, it's the same. There are different considerations because of that change in scope, but the job itself is the same.
Yeah. Did it ever feel overwhelming, to be in charge of something on Broadway and you have all of these people and, the audience paid quite a bit of money to be there. And, there's a kind of a lot, I would imagine as like a stage manager, there would be pressure involved with that. Do you ever feel that?
Yes. I think I'm going to say something that I said in another conversation a bit ago when I was talking about stage management, and at the time kind of said it like as a joke, but I think it's true. I'm a triple earth sign, and I really think that for me that helps me. The groundedness of that is actually very helpful in terms of my job, for lots of reasons, and I think this is one of them. In terms of, I don't think I necessarily super think about those things when I do my job. I think that whether or not we're playing for one person or 1,000 people, the goal is to give them the best performance possible. And the goal is to, have a company and a culture that is safe and happy and therefore able to give the best performance and product possible. And so, no, I kind of don't think about that in my own practice of how I work, though I'm sure there are lots of people who do and for whom that is very useful. But I think that the way that my engine works, it's not something I really factor in. What can start to make things feel that way about Broadway is about the expectation versus the actual doing, right? Because the show is going to be the show, right? And if everybody feels safe, and feels supported, then the show should be the same, right? So the thing that changes the show is expectation. And I think I work hard as a stage manager who has some sort of sway over how the company is feeling, slash as someone who is a leader in the space in terms of setting the tone for the space. I try to make my stance on this clear in terms of, my expectation is that one person or 1,000 people, the goal is to have our same show that we believe in, that we created. And that, I think, helps change and lower expectation, right? You don't have to do anything different because it's 1,000 people. You don't have to do anything different because whatever celebrity is in the audience. The goal is to act. The actual goal is to live in the truth that we've already found.
Yeah, I love that. I love like keeping that perspective of almost being like more intrinsically motivated to make quality art that you believe in and that you're passionate about versus being extrinsically motivated by other factors.
Yeah, and I think that we kind of, as an industry, in theory, that should be the way it is anyway, because we set the tone from rehearsal. When you're doing it in rehearsal, you're only performing for team directing, team stage management, team choreography, the dramaturgy team, the literary team. Like, there's a very small group of people that see you do this in rehearsal, but that's where you built what we're working on. And the same can be said for moving into tech and previews. Well, tech is that, again, we've expanded this circle to now include, okay, now designers are working and there are a few more people in the space. But the people that you've built this thing with is not a large number of people. And so the expectation should be that, at least in my opinion, in the way that I try to work, is that we've built something that we believe in and that we've all had a hand in making. We can move forward from here, and be it for a small audience or a large audience, people who paid $1 million, people who paid $2, we know the thing that we've created and what it should feel like and look like and smell like and taste like, and we can make that thing. At least that's how I try to stage manage. And so the goal then is that kind of bleeds into how the company feels as well.
Yeah, that's great. Talk a little bit about communication, right? As a stage manager, you're in the center, really, of all of these different departments and teams, and you're organizing all of this information and a ton of people, and right, different people communicate
Mhm.
differently, especially in theater, because we're all from such different backgrounds and view art differently. How do you go between all these different communication styles, I guess?
Yeah. I think two things. I think that honesty and clarity will trump anyone's differences in communication style. And
Mm,
so if you are upfront about exactly what you need and you are clear about those things, even if you communicate in different ways, the honesty and the clarity will be evident, and therefore hopefully you can stay on the same page. By that I mean, anything from, when I send an email, I almost always end with, please reach out if you have any comments, questions, or concerns. Because just because it made sense to me as I typed it does not mean it made sense to you as you read it. There's always dialogue. It's nothing is a one-way directive, and almost everything is a conversation. And so I think being open about that, being open about the fact that we understand that people are different and that they understand things differently and communicate differently is how you get through that, so that when someone reaches back out to an email and says, I didn't understand that, can you just say it in the plainest of language? And then you give them a bullet list and they're like, thank you, got it. There's no offense and there's no upset, and it's just like, that's what you needed to move forward, and I'm very happy to provide that thing, right? I do think that something else I can say about communication styles too is that the longer you work in the industry, the more you understand your own communication style and the things that you need to communicate clearly, and how to communicate that to those you need to talk to, right? And so the longer you work in the industry, the better you get at being open about, hey, I actually think better in bullet points. So when you send me things, if you can lean in that direction, that would be great, right? Versus someone who's like, oh no, paragraph style works better for me. Or if you can actually snap me a picture of something you drew, that that you learn that for yourself and then are able to tell that to the people who need to know that. And that as stage managers, we're well used to different people have different communication styles and have different needs. And because unless you're working on a long running show, you're, every couple of months you're doing something different with an entirely different set of people most of the time, you're used to switching it up and maybe having to talk to two people on the same show in two different ways. But that's okay, right? We're used to, stage management is used to having to be facile in that way, because unless you've been working on a long running show for a long time, you're moving through different people and having to change that communication style anyway. And I will also say, as in terms of stage management, because we work in teams, often the team itself has different communication styles within it, right? So if the production stage manager thinks in bullet points and the assistant stage manager thinks in paragraphs, and I don't know why that is the visual that my brain is having right now about communicating, but here we are. But amongst a team, that could also be true, right? And so then maybe it's like, well, you think in bullet points and so does the costume designer. So actually, when we need to communicate something complicated to the costume designer, I'm going to lean heavily on you because you two have similar communication styles. And so knowing yourself actually helps the whole team. And then the longer you work, just the more comfortable you are with telling people that and being upfront about it, so that there's no awkward like, oh, I didn't get it. There's just a like, hey, can you alter how you said that, because it will make it easier for me.
Yeah, I know I've learned a lot from working with a lot of different stage managers, like things that have worked, things that have been effective in how they communicate. Some of the best, I think of like some of the best stage managers I've worked with, like their emails, there's very rarely a spelling error. They're short and clear. It's not like this flowery language. And I've grown in my communication skill by just, paying attention to how, like, the effectiveness of different stage managers and how they communicate with the cast and crew.
Yeah, and I think this is gonna sound bad, but I don't mean it to be. Human beings have really short attention spans, right?
Uh-huh.
And that's just like a fact of being a person. And I think stage managers come to know that pretty quickly. And so, yeah, when I'm sending an email, when I'm making an announcement, when I'm typing a report, it's like you are reading this thing or listening to this thing to get very specific information. And the clearer and faster I can get you that information, the better. And so, yeah, stage managers, I think, learn that. It happens very often that young stage managers coming right out of college will be used to and maybe lean towards being more verbose, particularly in, say, reports or welcome emails. And they'll learn over time as they see how it goes that, like, no, people just want, like, hi, welcome, thank you so very much, here is the information you need.
Yeah.
Right? And it's not that they don't appreciate that you're excited to meet them. It's not that they don't want a warm and welcoming environment. It's that, like, there's so many things happening, and and it's so easy to lose information that keeping it short and sweet is like the way to go, you know? Because actually, I mean, and I say all of that now, it was the same for me. I will never forget in college, I had a teacher who asked for more detailed reports and then sent me an example of a report from a previous student that was, I'm just going to say, ridiculous. I mean, now as someone who's been working, this report that I based my kind of reporting style around, because that's what this professor wanted, was so, I mean, it was impressive. It was so detailed and so long. And now I'm like, I, as a stage manager, wouldn't even want to read that. Right. And so there's no way that the director who left the show 3 weeks ago and is directing something else and really just needs to know how it went, what's being noted, and whether or not they need to come back and look at something is going to read that. But that's also a lesson in communication style, right? Because that professor clearly needed and wanted that level of detail. And so in some ways it was really good that I had to learn to make such intensely detailed reports, even if now it's very rare that I would ever write a report like that. It's good to know that some people need that and want that, and that I now have the skill to be able to produce that, right? But yeah, it's all about flexibility and knowing yourself, and being comfortable in yourself, and then learning from there, so that you can adapt, because nothing in theater is going to run forever. You will at some point have to do a different production with different people, you know? And so
Hmm.
something about the way that you communicate is going to have to shift,
Hmm.
which I think is probably also why we keep it so simple, because then we don't have to think about it. It's like
Yeah.
the same blanket, simple formula of getting information out will work for the largest number of people.
Yeah, I like that. Yeah, I stage management, that's one job that I I am not suited for, and part of the reason I'm not suited for is all of the people. And when people get together, there's going to be conflict, there's going to be disagreement, there's going to be actors that are just ask impossible things. So how do you deal with those situations when two people aren't getting along, or one person is very upset about something and they come to you? How do you kind of navigate the people side of the inevitable people side of your job?
Yeah. So I think a few things. I think one is that I'm a people person in terms of being, raised with three siblings and part of a family of six, and I have lots of cousins, and so I'm well versed in managing personalities. And because I tend to have a very neutral personality, it's easy for me to get along with lots of different kinds of people. So personally, I think that is a huge asset for my job, is that I'm a middle child in the most classic sense of the word, of that kind of understanding of middle children. And so that means that I'm just like very good at getting along with a lot of people. um, that being said, I think two things this question brings up for me. One is that as much as we love our jobs, and we think that work is fun, because it is, making theater is incredibly fun if you're doing it correctly. We literally get to make magic for a living. As much as that is true, it is work. And I think that because we have this personal attachment to our projects so often, and we literally pour ourselves into our jobs, sometimes the line gets blurry, right? And so sometimes it's hard, I think, for people, and conflict occurs for people because of that blurriness of, I've poured so much of my spirit into this thing that we're creating, because it's fun, because I love my job, because we're making magic, that I forget that it's a job. And at any other job, when there's conflict, when there is something you're unhappy about, when something needs to be changed, there's a clear chain of command, and you remove your emotions from the situation and look at it very logically from an I'm an employee to an employer. What do I need to do to solve this problem, right?
Hmm.
And so, in my experience, and I don't want to speak for all stage managers, but in my experience, I would say 8 times out of 10, putting us back into the workplace helps to solve problems because it takes emotion off the table and puts everybody in the headspace of, we are co-workers solving a problem together. Because that, it's like you said, right, that emotions are run high because we're living in our dressing rooms. Right, we're doing these shows for 8 shows a week, and we just like see these small tiny rooms all day for 7 days a week, and or 6 days a week, sometimes seven, who am I kidding? We're around the same 10 people, say you're working on a play, it's like 10 people that you spend all of your time with in these like beige walled rooms. So, yes, emotions are totally going to run high, but reminding people and ourselves, myself, that this is work. And there are times when I can treat you like my friend because you are. And there are other times where we have to communicate as coworkers because that is also what we are. I think very frequently leads to problem solving for both people. It's just changing the perspective of the situation. Of like, when you're coming to me as your stage manager about a problem, right now we're coworkers. I'm actually not your friend, right? I am your coworker, a supervisor in this space, working with you to facilitate solving a problem. And after the show, we can go get a drink and you can talk to your friend about whatever this problem is. But right now, a supervisor in this building is going to help you solve your problem. So I think that is one thing, is really just that it's hard for people in the entertainment business, understandably, to separate themselves, the people, from themselves, the employers and employees. So I think that's one. In terms of tense situations, I think that that's also an inevitable thing. It happens everywhere, and that again in theater, we it feels more personal because we have poured ourselves into our work. But that if you treat people like people and if you treat them like adults, that you can, 9 times out of 10, you can solve your problem just with open communication and honesty. And that most of the time people are not being difficult or causing problems to do that exclusively. There is something else happening. There's something underneath it. There is an engine driving that. And that with open communication, you can get to the bottom of it and solve that problem, right? Because sometimes, an actor is coming to you because of one problem, but then when you sit and talk about it, you're like, oh, you feel that the problem is with the costume. But when we sit down and really talk through this problem, it's that in that moment the costume and the blocking aren't working congruously, and that's why you think you don't want to wear the costume. But in actuality, we just need to have a conversation about how to make the blocking and the costume work together, right? Like that person is not being difficult. They just, it just required a conversation. It just required some creative problem solving together. So I would say that in my experience, most people are not being difficult just to be difficult. There's more there, and conversation 9 times out of 10 will help you get to the bottom of that. That being said, there is that one time out of 10 where someone is just difficult. Um, that's just a fact of life. Not everybody is like the nicest person in the world. Not everybody is super sweet. There are difficult people in the world. And those are the moments that I have to remind myself that we are at work and that this is a job and that it is my job to treat this person the same as I treat everybody else. People aren't required to be nice or to want to say be a part of the feeling of community or camaraderie. That is not a requirement of their job, and so I can't force them to behave the way that I would like them to behave because I would like it. In those moments, really keeping the understanding that we are at work and this is a workplace and this is a job very clear helps in dealing with difficult people. It's your prerogative to be difficult. I'm going to come in and do my job as best I can despite that. And then I think the last thing that I will say is, like I mentioned earlier, when we're doing theater, we're sitting in small, typically beige rooms with the same group of people for hours on end, for 6 days a week. It's constant. And that is bound to make some people a little stir crazy. And so there are also all of the ways that we make our workplace fun and do things to alleviate tension so that we are less likely to have people get to the point of behaving in a difficult way for other reasons, right? And so a great example of that is that at Slave Play, we would do dance parties downtown. We did them literally every day before the show. We would play a song, and just the whole cast would be on company. I mean, technicians, everybody. If you wanted to dance, you came and you danced, right? We blasted a song and we danced full out to a song for 3.5 minutes, and then we cleared the stage, we closed the doors, and we opened the house. We did it every day. That's because it was clear that the company, that show was intense. and and so tensions were running high, right? People were feeling a lot of things. The dressing room space was small. We were spending all of our time together. That company came together and was like, we can dance this out, guys. Like, let's just dance it out. And stage management took requests, and our amazing sound team was like, we can play that through the house speaker, sure. And we just danced it out every day, and it helped. It released these feelings that people were understandably feeling from being cooped up in these rooms with one another. There are other ways too that we do things to relieve tension, and that every workplace does, right? Like, lots of workplaces do things like Secret Santa, or get-togethers, and going to the bar after the show is a way to alleviate tension. Another one that I love, and shout out to Amanda Spooner, who I 1000% stole this from. Amanda Spooner, who is a brilliant stage manager and an idol of mine. She does something called Super Secret Fun Fact that I've stolen from her, which is that when a show is about to close, we collect fun facts from members of the company. Anyone who would like to play can play. I collect facts about them, and then I make a worksheet where I take their names out, and everyone has to guess who each fact is about. And then there's like a small prize for the people who get the most right. That is always a very fun week in the theater when people are running around trying to discover each other's secrets. So there are all of these other ways that we work to alleviate tension so that people feel safe and comfortable and in their spaces, that will help to alleviate these tensions.
Mm-hmm. As you're working to like regulate group culture and atmosphere, how do you take care of yourself in order to to go in and to be patient with people and to take time to listen?
Yeah. I'm very lucky to have a wonderful partner and a delightful roommate, both of whom also work in the industry, so they get it. I also have pets. I've during quarantine learned to bake. In fact, last night I made homemade pizza for the first time, which is very stress relieving. I take exercise classes. I think all of those things on the small scale. But I also think that, stage managers also work in teams, right? So there are multiple people for them to be in communication with, to uplift one another, to maintain that same space that they're holding for the company for each other. While stage management has a supervisory position in a theater, in a rehearsal room, there are people who supervise us, right? Who feel that same responsibility for our well-being and our feeling heard and our feeling safe, in the same way that we feel responsible to the company. And so there are people doing the same thing for stage managers, or there should be, as stage managers are doing for their companies. And so an example of this is that at New York Theater Workshop, the producing associate, Yang Yang Chen, is a delight of a human being. And I've worked there many times, and now for first rehearsal or prep day, I'll come into work, and I really love mango high chews, which are these candies, and she knows I love them, and I will just find them. She will just like leave them for me around the building. Or on tech, she's in constant contact with stage management so that she knows when breaks are happening, so that we can call a break, and she will waltz into the room. It's literally so majestic with whatever. I truly think she's magical because she knows exactly what the company needs. Sometimes it is a simple PB&J. Sometimes it is a piece of cake. And sometimes it's like, I brought carrots because no one has eaten a vegetable today, right? She just she's incredible. And so there we have, the institution looking out for the entire company and the team and the stage management team in the same way that the stage management team does that for the rest of the company.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a good system.
And that's at a place that isn't an institution. New York Theater Workshop is an institution that has staff in the traditional sense. But for example, on Broadway, we have company managers, people who are really thinking about the comfort and the safety of the company, and the company includes the stage managers. But they aren't people who are necessarily at the theater for the whole show every night.
Mhm. This has been a really hard 9 months or however long, I don't know, 8, 9 months,
10
um,
years.
10 years, an eternity. Um, and I've talked to a lot of friends that do different jobs in the theater world that I've kept up with over the years. So many people are just discouraged right now.
hmm
What keeps you going? Like, why have you not just left the industry?
Oh, I just love my job so much. And I think that every time I do one of these digital shows, even though it's not exactly the same, I get a glimpse of the things that are the same, and it
Hmm.
makes its own kind of digital magic. I'm reminded that I miss my job, that it's something that I'm good at and that I enjoy, that I strive to get better at, and that there are still things about my job that I haven't gotten to do that I would like to do, and that there are places I haven't gotten to work that I would like to work. And so I think that keeps me going. I think also the theater community keeps me going, because there are days when I'm like, we're never coming back. I'm gonna work in admin forever, um, and then a friend shows me some sort of digital project they were working on that I wasn't involved in, but that was great. Or a friend just calls me, and we talk and we reminisce, and it reminds me about what I loved, and who I loved and how I loved. Right. I think that the hope is alive because there's just so much I've yet to do that I would like to do, and I'm not giving up until I get to. um, and also because I think, I don't know, maybe this is the like annoying New Yorker in me, but just, we're gonna make it. We're gonna get through it. There's gonna be a vaccine. There will be an other side of this, right? Even though it doesn't feel like it right now, as we head into what feels like that second or third or whatever number wave that we've heard about for so long, as we head into what feels like possibly another lockdown. The thing to keep in mind is that there will be a like post pandemic, right? And it won't be as soon as we would all like it to be, but it will be. And so, we have to hold out and we have to hold faith, but it's possible and it will happen. And when we get there, there's stuff I want to do. And so I think that's why, and how I'm holding out and holding hope.
Yeah, that feeling like I'm not done yet.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, and it's as little as, I would love to do a show in California. I would love to do a tour at some point, maybe. I would love to call a musical on Broadway. There's like a million, a million things, big and small. I like want to do understudy rehearsal again. I haven't done one in forever. So there are tons of things, big and small, that I still want to do, and that the possibility is there. And so I'm holding out till I get to. Maybe that's me being stubborn. I don't know if I'd call it hope so much as stubbornness, but whatever it is, it's what's keeping me going.
Yeah, I like it. So I have one final question that I like to ask everyone, and that is, what advice would you give to young stage managers?
I think the thing that's been on my mind a lot and lately, that I've said to people lately, is something that actually really isn't stage management specific. I think it's kind of young person specific, maybe young person in the theater industry specific, but it's that you have to trust your journey. It's going to look very different than anyone else's. No two
Hmm.
people's journeys are exactly the same. it will not feel like you are on the quote trajectory you would like to be on at any given moment. It will be hard. It will feel like, compared to the people who are at the same, who you feel are your co-conspirators, who are at the same level with you, you may feel like you're not on even footing with them.
Mm-hmm.
But your journey is yours, and you're the only one who gets to have it. And you just have to trust it and keep going and believe and work hard, and what will be will be. And I say that because I think that I too get caught up in comparing myself to people who I feel like, okay, we all kind of started at the same time and we've been kind of doing the same things. But when you play that game, inevitably in some areas you're quote losing, and in other areas you're quote winning. And that's just not useful for our industry and for your spirit and for the world, right? Like, that's capitalism speaking, right? So
Yeah.
just trust your journey. Trust that you're where you're supposed to be when you're supposed to be there, as long as it feels right and good and feels like something you're invested in and want to be a part of. As long as you feel like you're learning and growing as an artist, it's where you're supposed to be. And so don't worry about what anyone else is doing. Do what you're doing and trust it. And eventually you're going to look back and be like, yeah, that's exactly what I was supposed to be doing. And it didn't look like what my friends were doing, and it didn't look like what this person I idolized was doing at the same time as me, but it's where I was supposed to be.
The music for the Backstage Creative was improvised and performed by Ian Leroy, and the logo was designed by Zach Rimbold.